The desert does not forgive mistakes. The scorching sun turns every movement into labor, and the endless expanse of sand erases direction, erodes confidence, and tests the limits of human endurance. In 1941, when World War II's battles expanded into North Africa, it became immediately clear that this war would not resemble the trench warfare of France or the urban combat of Poland. Here, mobility, speed, and supply lines dictated survival. The vast deserts of Libya and Egypt, seemingly barren and lifeless, became the stage for one of the most remarkable campaigns in military history, a struggle between the audacious German general Erwin Rommel, later called the Desert Fox, and the Allied forces determined to stop him. Rommel arrived in North Africa in February 1941 with the newly formed Afrika Korps, a force small in number but large in reputation. The German High Command sent him not merely to defend Italian positions but to reinvigorate a faltering campaign. Italy, having already faced disastrous setbacks in Cyrenaica, needed a leader capable of reversing momentum. Rommel, a man known for daring maneuvers and unconventional strategies, quickly assessed the desert as both a challenge and an opportunity. He understood that the Allies relied heavily on predictable supply routes and fortified positions. He saw in the desert not just sand and heat, but a canvas where speed, surprise, and audacity could shape outcomes far beyond the size of his army. The desert itself became a formidable adversary. Temperatures soared above 50 degrees Celsius during the day and plummeted at night, and sandstorms could appear without warning, burying tracks and disorienting units. Vehicles struggled as engines choked on fine dust, and tanks sank in soft dunes. Water was scarce, food was rationed, and every mile traversed carried the risk of dehydration or mechanical failure. Logistics, rather than the enemy, often determined victories or defeats. Commanders who underestimated the desert soon learned that survival depended on meticulous planning, adaptability, and a willingness to push men and machines beyond ordinary limits. The desert demanded respect, and Rommel quickly showed that he was willing to bend rules to exploit its harshness. The early months of the Afrika Korps campaign were marked by a series of lightning advances that astonished both Allies and Axis alike. Rommel's strategy relied on rapid, coordinated assaults that combined infantry, artillery, and mechanized units, particularly tanks. Intelligence was key. Scouts and reconnaissance planes constantly probed enemy positions, while Rommel analyzed not only troop strength but also terrain, weather, and supply lines. He attacked when opponents were vulnerable and withdrew before overextension could become fatal. His approach, characterized by bold maneuvers and calculated risks, earned him his nickname, the Desert Fox. To the Allies, his movements seemed almost preternatural, a blend of insight, audacity, and ruthless efficiency that left chaos in his wake. The first major confrontation that tested Rommel's leadership came near Tobruk, a strategic port city in Libya. Tobruk's harbor was vital for supply lines, and control of it promised dominance over eastern Libya. The Allies, primarily British and Commonwealth forces, fortified the city heavily, relying on its natural defenses and coastal artillery. Yet Rommel, understanding the importance of psychological impact as much as physical conquest, executed a series of feints and rapid armored thrusts that outflanked enemy positions. Despite fierce resistance, the city eventually fell, its capture serving as both a tactical and symbolic victory for the Axis. It demonstrated Rommel's ability to combine military precision with a deep understanding of human and psychological factors on the battlefield. However, victories in the desert were never simple or absolute. For every successful maneuver, Rommel faced constant logistical nightmares. Fuel and ammunition were precious commodities, often transported hundreds of miles over sand-choked roads under threat of air attack. Water and food for men were limited, and maintenance crews worked tirelessly to keep tanks and trucks operational under the relentless sun. Every day brought a choice: advance quickly and risk supply depletion, or pause and consolidate, risking the loss of momentum. Rommel often chose the former, believing that speed and initiative could compensate for material limitations. His philosophy relied on boldness, deception, and relentless pursuit of advantage, qualities that both impressed and unnerved his superiors and adversaries. Meanwhile, the Allied forces faced their own set of challenges. British, Australian, New Zealand, and Indian troops had to adapt to a desert environment that was completely unlike any theater they had previously experienced. Traditional tactics of entrenched positions and coordinated offensives were less effective when the enemy could appear from any direction with little warning. Communication difficulties, mechanical breakdowns, and the constant threat of ambush created a tense atmosphere where command decisions carried immense weight. Yet the Allies were learning quickly, studying Rommel's methods, improving coordination between infantry and armor, and gradually adapting to the fluid, mobile nature of desert warfare. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only strategy and courage but endurance, ingenuity, and the human spirit. The desert also introduced an unpredictable factor: the environment itself. Sandstorms could obliterate visibility within minutes, hiding troop movements or causing disastrous disorientation. Heat exhaustion claimed more soldiers than bullets, and the barren landscape made concealment challenging while also offering endless possibilities for ambush. Supply convoys became vulnerable not only to enemy action but to mechanical failure or misnavigation. Rommel, understanding these realities, turned the environment into an ally. He timed attacks with wind and sunlight, used dunes to conceal armor, and exploited the exhaustion of enemy troops unaccustomed to such conditions. The desert, harsh and indifferent, became a partner in his campaigns, amplifying his tactical brilliance. By the end of 1941, the Desert Campaign had established patterns that would define the North African theater. Rommel's Afrika Korps demonstrated the potency of speed, surprise, and decentralized command, while the Allies began to understand the necessity of intelligence, coordination, and adaptation. Each engagement was a microcosm of the desert itself, unpredictable, punishing, and decisive. The desert was not merely a backdrop, it was an active participant, shaping decisions, outcomes, and the fate of those who dared to challenge it. As Rommel pressed deeper into Egypt, the world began to take notice. Newspapers dubbed him the Desert Fox, generals marveled at his daring, and soldiers both Allied and Axis learned to respect the formidable combination of man, machine, and landscape. Yet beneath the triumphs and strategic brilliance, the campaign carried a stark truth: in the desert, survival was as crucial as victory. A single misstep, a miscalculated distance, a delayed resupply, or underestimating the enemy could transform success into disaster. The Desert Fox knew this, and every advance was measured not just in territory gained, but in the delicate balance between risk and necessity. The Desert War had begun, and its consequences would ripple across continents, influencing the broader course of World War II. From the shimmering sands of Libya to the fortified approaches of Egypt, the battle for North Africa had turned into a test of skill, courage, and endurance unlike any seen before. The Desert Fox was at its center, and as the sun rose over the endless dunes, one thing was certain: in the unforgiving expanse of North Africa, only the clever, the fast, and the resilient would survive. Rommel's Gambit. The desert is a chessboard, and Erwin Rommel played every move like a grandmaster. Unlike conventional battles confined by trenches or city streets, desert warfare demanded vision, flexibility, and audacity. In the spring of 1942, Rommel's Afrika Korps, though numerically inferior to the Allies, demonstrated a mastery of mobility that would become legendary. Each tank, each unit, each convoy of trucks carried not just men and equipment, but the promise of a strategy that relied on speed, deception, and the ability to exploit the enemy's hesitation. Every mile covered across sand and rock was a calculated gamble, and Rommel thrived on the stakes. By this time, the British Eighth Army, reorganized after previous setbacks, had fortified positions along Libya's coast. Rommel faced a choice: attack head-on and risk heavy casualties, or employ his hallmark tactic of flanking maneuvers, striking where the enemy least expected. True to form, he chose the latter. The desert provided the perfect environment for his strategy. Vast open spaces allowed armored units to move with surprising stealth under the cover of night or behind sand dunes. Reconnaissance became essential. Rommel often led scouting missions himself, studying terrain, enemy supply lines, and even the weather patterns that could delay or accelerate movement. His personal involvement earned him the loyalty of his officers and the nickname Desert Fox, a testament to his cunning and intuition. The Battle of Gazala, which began in May 1942, exemplified Rommel's approach. Gazala was a line of fortified positions stretching across the Libyan desert, held by British and Commonwealth troops. Conventional wisdom suggested a prolonged siege or frontal assault, but Rommel saw opportunity in audacity. He orchestrated a feint to distract the enemy, making them believe the attack would target the central positions. Meanwhile, his armored divisions swept around the southern flank, traversing miles of sand with precision and speed. This maneuver, daring and risky, caught the Allies off guard. Tanks rumbled across dunes and desert tracks, artillery followed, and infantry units closed in to consolidate gains. The success of this maneuver demonstrated that in desert warfare, timing, deception, and mobility often outweighed sheer numbers. The capture of Tobruk, months later, was another masterstroke. The port had resisted multiple assaults, and its harbor was a lifeline for the Allies. Rommel understood its psychological and strategic significance. He pressed forward relentlessly, exploiting weaknesses in Allied coordination. Every advance was calculated, every pause deliberate, and every engagement measured. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, was both ally and adversary. Supply lines had to stretch across hundreds of miles of sand, vehicles broke down under extreme heat, men suffered from fatigue and dehydration. Yet Rommel's leadership and ability to adapt turned these challenges into advantages. The speed and surprise of his attacks prevented the Allies from mounting effective countermeasures, and Tobruk fell, cementing the Afrika Korps' reputation. Rommel's genius lay not merely in tactics, but in his understanding of human psychology. He recognized that fear, uncertainty, and surprise could be as decisive as artillery or tanks. His maneuvers often created confusion among Allied commanders, forcing them into reactive positions. Small, rapid strikes disrupted supply lines and communication networks, leaving defenders uncertain and hesitant. This psychological edge, combined with relentless mobility, allowed Rommel to achieve victories that seemed improbable given the size of his forces. In the desert, where visibility was wide but predictability was scarce, these qualities proved invaluable. Tank warfare became the defining feature of the campaign. German panzer divisions, though fewer in number than the Allies, were expertly coordinated. Rommel emphasized combined arms tactics. Infantry and artillery would advance alongside tanks, engineers cleared obstacles, and reconnaissance units reported back every movement of the enemy. Tanks were not merely weapons, they were instruments of strategy, enabling rapid flanking, encirclement, and exploitation of weaknesses. Every engagement showcased a careful balance of aggression and caution, as Rommel knew that desert terrain could easily turn advantage into disaster. Soft sand, sudden dunes, and exposed roads could trap even the most formidable armored units if misjudged. However, every triumph came at a cost. Supply lines were stretched dangerously thin, and fuel shortages constantly threatened the mobility that Rommel relied on. Ammunition had to be rationed meticulously, even minor mechanical failures could halt an entire division. Men marched for miles under blistering sun, carrying equipment and facing the relentless monotony of desert terrain, all while maintaining readiness for combat. Rommel's ability to maintain morale, enforce discipline, and inspire resilience in such conditions was critical. He led from the front, sharing risks with his soldiers, and this personal courage fostered loyalty that allowed his units to function as a cohesive, efficient force. Rommel's audacity forced the Allies to rethink their strategies. British commanders began to fortify defensive lines, improve coordination between armor and infantry, and employ deception to mask troop movements. Yet the Afrika Korps remained unpredictable. Rommel's willingness to exploit terrain, weather, and timing ensured that he retained the initiative. In every encounter, he demonstrated the principle that mobility could substitute for numbers, and surprise could amplify strength. The desert became a dynamic battlefield, where conventional metrics of power mattered less than cunning, speed, and adaptability. Despite these successes, Rommel faced mounting challenges. The vast distances of the desert, constant Allied counterattacks, and the increasing presence of American forces in North Africa strained his resources. Maintaining supply lines became a delicate balancing act, and every advance required careful calculation. The desert, for all its openness, was treacherous. A single miscalculation could isolate units, create vulnerabilities, and reverse hard-won gains. Yet Rommel's ability to navigate these complexities, to turn scarcity into opportunity, defined his reputation as a commander who could outthink and outmaneuver numerically superior forces. By late 1942, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test Rommel's strategies to the extreme. His early victories, built on speed, surprise, and audacity, had brought Axis forces deep into Egypt. Yet the Allies, learning from past defeats, were preparing a response that combined meticulous planning, improved intelligence, and superior resources. Rommel's gambit, bold, brilliant, and high risk, had carried him this far, but the desert had a way of punishing even the cleverest fox. As both sides braced for the inevitable clash, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath, aware that the outcome would hinge on every decision, every movement, and every ounce of courage displayed under its relentless sun. In the vast, unyielding expanse of North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps had demonstrated the power of ingenuity, speed, and psychological warfare. Each battle was not merely a clash of armies, but a contest between strategy, adaptability, and endurance. The desert demanded respect, and Rommel had earned it, weaving daring maneuvers into victories that seemed improbable. Yet even as he pressed forward, the challenges loomed larger: supply shortages, harsh climate, and increasingly prepared allies threatened to turn triumph into trial. The desert fox had gambled, and the desert itself was ready to determine the stakes. The Allied counterattack. By mid-1942, the tide of desert warfare began to shift, and the Allies, bruised but unbroken, were preparing a response that would test Rommel's audacity like never before. Months of retreat and improvisation had taught the British Eighth Army invaluable lessons. The desert was no longer a passive backdrop but an active participant in battle, capable of disorienting even the most disciplined forces. Intelligence had improved, reconnaissance became more precise, and new armored divisions, reinforced by fresh American and Commonwealth troops, arrived in North Africa with one clear objective: to halt the Desert Fox and reclaim lost ground. The Desert Sun had a way of exposing weakness, and the Allies understood this better than before. General Bernard Montgomery, newly appointed commander of the 8th Army, emphasized meticulous preparation, coordination, and discipline. Unlike Rommel, who thrived on rapid, unpredictable advances, Montgomery relied on methodical positioning, calculated offensives, and the deliberate accumulation of resources. His forces dug in along strategic points in Egypt, fortified supply lines, and stockpiled equipment and fuel, transforming the open desert into a defensive network prepared for both attrition and counterattack. The message was clear: the Allies would no longer respond impulsively, they would strike with precision. The early stages of the counterattack were dominated by reconnaissance and probing maneuvers. Allied patrols tested German positions, analyzing weaknesses while avoiding full-scale engagements that might invite catastrophic losses. Engineers surveyed desert tracks, assessing the terrain for armored movement and potential obstacles. Signals intelligence intercepted German communications, providing insight into Rommel's strategies and timing. Every action, from vehicle maintenance to ration distribution, was conducted with an awareness that the desert could amplify mistakes. The Allies were learning the language of desert warfare, translating experience into advantage. Montgomery's strategy emphasized preparation and psychological resilience. Troops trained relentlessly, learning how to operate in extreme heat, navigate shifting sands, and maintain combat readiness under arduous conditions. Morale, once fragile after successive retreats, became a focus of leadership. Soldiers understood that the desert tested not only their physical strength but also their patience, discipline, and willpower. Every regiment, from infantry to artillery to tank divisions, was coordinated with precision, ensuring that when the moment came, the 8th Army could deliver a synchronized, overwhelming response. The Battle of El Alamein, which would become the defining confrontation of this phase, was preceded by weeks of deliberate planning. Montgomery understood the stakes: the Mediterranean supply lines, the Suez Canal, and the oil-rich regions of the Middle East depended on halting Rommel's advance. The desert terrain played a dual role: an obstacle for movement, yet a stage for deception and surprise. Minefields, dummy positions, and deceptive troop placements were employed to confuse the Afrika Korps. Camouflage and night maneuvers were standard practice, turning the open desert into a complex battlefield where visibility did not guarantee certainty and every move carried strategic weight. Rommel, for all his brilliance, faced the limitations of extended supply lines and exhausted troops. His forces, stretched thin across hundreds of miles, relied on fuel, ammunition, and water that were increasingly difficult to transport. He anticipated Allied attacks and continued to maneuver aggressively, seeking to preempt Montgomery's preparations. Yet the growing size and coordination of the 8th Army made rapid breakthroughs more difficult. The Desert Fox's genius lay in initiative, but initiative could only carry an army so far when the enemy anticipated, organized, and countered with superior resources. The initial engagements during the counter-offensive showcase the growing skill of Allied armored units. British and Commonwealth tank divisions, once vulnerable to the Panzer Division's speed and coordination, now employed combined arms tactics. Infantry advanced alongside tanks, artillery provided suppressive fire, and reconnaissance units maintained constant surveillance. Unlike previous battles, where Rommel's surprise maneuvers often dictated outcomes, the Allies had begun to seize the initiative themselves. They probed for weak points, exploited errors, and applied pressure strategically rather than impulsively. The desert, long a source of advantage for the Axis, was becoming a stage where meticulous planning could neutralize audacity. Air power also played a crucial role. Allied air squadrons, increasingly capable of patrolling desert skies, disrupted German supply lines and observed troop movements with precision. Bombing raids targeted fuel depots, armored columns, and forward positions, forcing Rommel to constantly adapt. The desert, which had once concealed and aided rapid maneuvers, now offered no guarantees of invisibility. Every movement had to be calculated, every advance covered by both ground coordination and aerial awareness. The balance of power in the desert was shifting, and Rommel found that speed alone could not compensate for growing Allied dominance in intelligence and resources. Montgomery's leadership emphasized patience and incremental gains. Rather than rushing headlong into decisive engagements, he orchestrated a series of deliberate offensives designed to erode German strength, secure supply lines, and maintain operational flexibility. Each artillery barrage, each advance of infantry, and each armored push was timed and coordinated to maximize pressure while minimizing risk. The Allies were turning desert warfare into a science of attrition and precision, challenging Rommel's reliance on audacity and surprise. In this environment, boldness alone could no longer determine the outcome. Discipline, logistics, and careful execution were equally critical. As the counterattack progressed, Rommel's forces were gradually compelled to withdraw from previously held positions. The Afrika Korps remained formidable, but the desert's vastness, previously an ally in rapid flanking maneuvers, now amplified the difficulty of regrouping under constant pressure. Supplies dwindled, troops were fatigued, and morale began to fray under sustained, coordinated assaults. The Allies, by contrast, maintained reserves, protected supply lines, and reinforced units as needed. What the Desert Fox had accomplished through ingenuity and mobility, the Eighth Army now countered through preparation, persistence, and superior coordination. By the end of 1942, the Allied counterattack had not only halted Rommel's advance but also set the stage for decisive confrontations that would determine the future of the North African campaign. The desert, once a theater dominated by Rommel's tactical brilliance, had become a proving ground for Allied strategy and resilience. Soldiers who had endured months of retreat, extreme climate, and relentless pressure now understood the desert's language, its dangers, and its opportunities. The Desert Fox remained a formidable adversary, but the Allies had learned to match audacity with preparation, speed with planning, and improvisation with discipline. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation at El Alamein, a battle that would test every lesson learned, every ounce of courage, and every tactical innovation in desert warfare. Rommel's Afrika Korps, still deadly, faced an enemy that had adapted, learned, and prepared for the first time to not merely react, but to strike decisively. The desert had shaped the first phase of the campaign in Rommel's favor, but now it demanded a new approach, one that the Allies were ready to deliver. In the vast, unyielding sands of North Africa, the Allied counterattack had begun to turn the tide. Patience, preparation, and intelligence replaced mere audacity, and the desert became a proving ground for strategy as much as courage. The Eighth Army's careful advances and coordinated operations signaled a new chapter in the war, one where the Desert Fox would meet an opponent capable of understanding, anticipating, and challenging his genius in the harshest conditions imaginable. The sands were shifting, and with them, the balance of power in North Africa. The turning sands. The desert is merciless, but it also reveals the limits of even the most brilliant commanders. By late 1942, the balance of power in North Africa had shifted. Rommel's early triumphs, built on audacity and mobility, were now constrained by overstretched supply lines, exhausted troops, and an enemy that had finally learned to anticipate his every move. The vast sands, once an ally to the Desert Fox, had begun to test him in ways no battle could. Logistics, fatigue, and attrition were mounting, and the Allies, now under Montgomery's disciplined command, were ready to exploit these vulnerabilities with precision and patience. The desert's unforgiving climate had always been a silent adversary. For Rommel's Afrika Korps, extended campaigns meant long convoys of fuel and ammunition traversing hundreds of miles, often under the relentless sun and exposed to Allied air patrols. Mechanical breakdowns were frequent, tanks bogged down in soft sand, and every delay threatened the fragile rhythm of operations. The men endured blistering days, freezing nights, and the constant thirst that gnawed at morale. Desert warfare had evolved beyond maneuver, survival itself became a critical component of strategy. Each decision carried immense weight, for a single logistical failure could unravel weeks of carefully orchestrated advances. The stage for the ultimate confrontation was set along a narrow stretch of desert near the Egyptian town of El Alamein. The landscape, deceptively open and monotonous, hid intricate networks of defensive fortifications, minefields, and artillery emplacements meticulously prepared by the Allies. Montgomery, understanding the limitations of frontal assaults, emphasized attrition and preparation. The Eighth Army's strength lay not just in numbers, but in coordination. Tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support were integrated to operate in synchrony, ensuring that every strike had a purpose, every maneuver covered, and every vulnerability accounted for. For the first time, Rommel faced an opponent who could combine patience, planning, and overwhelming firepower. The battle began with probing attacks, testing enemy positions and attempting to create openings. Rommel's forces, though experienced and highly mobile, found themselves constrained by geography and logistics. Each attack consumed precious fuel and ammunition, while the desert offered few opportunities for retreat or concealment. Allied countermeasures, informed by reconnaissance and intelligence, effectively anticipated flanking attempts and feints. What had once been Rommel's greatest advantage, surprise and speed, was now mitigated by meticulous preparation and strategic depth. The desert had leveled the playing field, demanding not just brilliance but endurance, foresight, and discipline. El Alamein became a theater where the consequences of every decision were magnified. Artillery barrages reshaped the sands, creating obstacles for advancing tanks and infantry. Mines and barbed wire funneled attacks into predictable paths, neutralizing the Afrika Korps' mobility. Air support from the Allies disrupted supply lines, attacked armored columns, and provided real-time intelligence on German positions. Rommel responded with characteristic ingenuity, employing deception, sudden counterattacks, and daring maneuvers, but each effort was increasingly costly. The desert, once a domain of his strategic creativity, now amplified the limitations imposed by attrition, fatigue, and dwindling resources. The human dimension of the battle became starkly evident. Soldiers on both sides faced unimaginable hardships. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, and disease claimed as many casualties as enemy fire. Desert terrain offered little shelter, and the monotony of endless dunes tested mental resilience. For Rommel, the psychological strain of command grew heavier as he witnessed his forces stretched thin, facing relentless pressure from an opponent who had learned to anticipate his moves. For the Allies, victory demanded not only courage but patience, coordination, and an unwavering commitment to execute plans under punishing conditions. The desert, impartial and relentless, judged every action with equal severity. As days turned into weeks, the cumulative effect of preparation, coordination, and sustained pressure became evident. Rommel's forces, though still formidable, could no longer maintain the initiative. Supply shortages limited offensive options, mechanical failures reduced mobility, and exhaustion undermined responsiveness. Montgomery's forces, conversely, had fortified their positions, maintained reserves, and leveraged superior numbers and firepower to control the tempo of battle. The Desert Fox, known for exploiting weaknesses and seizing opportunities, found that in El Alamein, opportunities were scarce, and the consequences of miscalculation had grown deadly. The eventual breakthrough came as the Allies launched a coordinated offensive that combined artillery, infantry, and armored divisions in a concentrated push. Tanks moved methodically through cleared paths, supported by artillery barrages that neutralized German positions. Infantry advanced behind protective fire, securing trenches and fortifications. Airstrikes disrupted German logistics, further weakening Rommel's ability to respond effectively. The Afrika Korps, despite valiant counterattacks, was forced to retreat incrementally. Every withdrawal was costly, not just in men and equipment, but in morale, as the once imposing Desert Fox realized that the sands that had favored his ingenuity were now aligned with his adversary's preparation. Rommel's retreat across the desert was a careful blend of strategy and necessity. He sought to preserve the core of his forces while avoiding encirclement, maintaining cohesion despite constant pressure. The desert, unforgiving and unyielding, dictated the pace of withdrawal, forcing reliance on remaining fuel, rationed water, and mechanical endurance. Every mile was fraught with risk. Enemy patrols, minefields, and aerial bombardment threatened annihilation. Yet the retreat was not merely survival, it was a tactical recalibration, an acknowledgement that even the most brilliant commander must yield to the realities of logistics, climate, and opposition. By early 1943, the Allies had regained the strategic initiative in North Africa. The combination of preparation, coordination, and relentless pressure had turned the tide. Rommel, though still a revered tactician, faced the undeniable truth that the desert, once an ally of audacity, now punished overextension. The lessons of North Africa were profound. Mobility and surprise could achieve stunning victories, but endurance, logistics, and methodical planning determined ultimate success. The desert had tested commanders, soldiers, and supply lines alike, revealing the harsh calculus that governed war in this unforgiving theater. The North African campaign concluded with the Axis forces retreating into Tunisia, their advance halted, and the Allies in firm control of Egypt and Libya. The desert had exacted its toll, leaving behind not only tales of courage, ingenuity, and audacity but also of endurance, coordination, and preparation. Rommel's legend as the Desert Fox remained intact, but so did the lesson that even brilliance is constrained by resources, climate, and sustained opposition. In the end, victory in the desert was measured not only by speed and daring but by the ability to survive, adapt, and endure in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The turning sands had spoken. The desert had shifted from an enabler of rapid conquest to a crucible that tested every aspect of strategy and human resilience. For the Allies, it was a moment of triumph, a testament to preparation, coordination, and patience. For Rommel, it was a reminder of the limits of audacity and the unforgiving nature of the North African theater. And for history, it was an enduring lesson. The desert does not favor the bold alone, it rewards the disciplined, the prepared, and those who understand that survival is inseparable from strategy.